This is Indonesia. Indonesia is situated in southeastern Asia and consists of a large archipelago between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, with more than 13,000 islands. It is the fourth most populous country in the world, with being the largest economy in Southeast Asia. In recent decades, Indonesia has been viewed as one of Asia's successful, highly performing and newly industrializing economies, following the path of the Asian tiger economies like Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. Let's dive into the economic history of this country to develop an understanding of its past to generate a consensus of the future. Initially, Indonesia was a Dutch colony from 1816 to 1945. Dutch imperialism can be viewed as having a rather complex mix of political, economic and military motives which influenced decisions about colonial borders, establishing political control in order to exploit oil and other natural resources, and preventing local uprisings. The outbreak of World War II disrupted international trade, and the Japanese attacked the Dutch colony. They occupied Indonesia in 1942 and remained in control until 1945, seriously disturbing and dislocating the economic order. After independence, the Indonesian economy had to recover from the hardships of the Japanese occupation and the war for independence. During the period from 1949 till 1965, there was very little economic growth. The country started its new beginning by adopting democracy, but a fragile one. There was a power struggle between the president, the army, the Communist Party and other political groups. Sukarno, the first president, aimed at self-sufficiency and import substitution and estranged the suppliers of Western capital, even more, when he developed communist sympathies. The next president General Suharto rose to power in 1966. In the economic history of Indonesia, these were the most important 3 decades when Suharto was the president. The essential mission of Suharto's New Order government was economic development, the first step being the reintegration of Indonesia back into the world economy by rejoining the IMF, the United Nations, and the World Bank in the second half of the 1960s. This started up the flow of financial assistance and foreign aid from the Western countries into Indonesia. Suharto tasked economic technocrats to come up with a plan for economic recovery. Subsequently, a free market mechanism was restored by control measures, followed by the implementation of the Foreign Investment Law, 1967, and Domestic Investment Law, 1968. These laws contained attractive incentives for investors to invest in the country, resulting in double-digit economic growth in 1968. Indonesia benefited significantly from 2 oil booms that emerged in the 1970s. The first oil boom occurred when OPEC drastically reduced its oil exports, and Indonesia was a member of the organization. The second boom took place as a result of the Iranian Revolution. Due to these oil booms, export earnings, as well as government revenues, rose sharply. This enabled the public sector to play a greater role in the economy by undertaking large public investments. Developing manufacturing sector was at the forefront of the government policy. In this figure, you can clearly see the increase in manufacturing as a share of GDP from 8% to 13% under Suharto, while the agriculture share declined from 51% to 23%. The rapid urbanization at that time paved the way for the domestic demand-fueled growth Indonesia is experiencing today. Before the 1980s, Indonesia's capital market was limited to the state-dominated banking system. Subsidized credit and interest rates were used in accordance with general government priorities, and a credit ceiling was imposed to ensure monetary stability. In 1983, a reform package abolished the credit ceiling system. Further reforms in 1988 liberalized licensing for new banks and lowered reserve requirements. The result was a dramatic expansion in the number of private banks, and the bank's share of total deposits. The Jakarta Stock Exchange also experienced explosive growth during that period. During Suharto's 3 decades in power, Indonesia's economy grew an average of 7% annually, and living standards rose substantially for the bulk of the population. Education and mass literacy programs were expanded. The government also initiated one of Asia's most successful family planning programs in order to slow down the growth of Indonesia's large population. In particular, the reduction in absolute poverty was a remarkable achievement of the government. In the mid-1960s, over half of the Indonesian population lived below the poverty line, but by 1996 this number had been reduced to 11%. Everything we shared about Suharto government might make you believe that all was going very smooth. However, this was not the case. The financial system had begun to run out of control after the deregulation measures of 1980s. With few restrictions to open banks, it became more difficult to monitor the money flows within the Indonesian banking system. A lack of financial data, and a weak regulatory and legal framework, contributed to Indonesia being the hardest hit country by the 1997 Asian financial crisis. The value of the Indonesian currency, the rupiah, tumbled to the lowest level. Continued rupiah depreciation only worsened the situation. Indonesian companies rushed to buy dollars, thus putting more downward pressure on the rupiah and exacerbating the company's debt situation. The government of Indonesia was unable to cope with this crisis, and decided to seek financial assistance from the IMF in October 1997. The IMF arrived in Indonesia with a bailout package totaling $43 billion to restore market confidence. As a result of the outbreak of the Asian financial crisis, the economy went into recession, inflation skyrocketed, and living standards worsened. Anti-government demonstrations turned into rioting in Jakarta, and subsequently, Suharto resigned. However, the nation learned its lessons quite well from the 1997 crisis. Robust financial laws were constructed to avoid such situation in future. By the start of 2000s, all macroeconomic indicators for Indonesia balanced, and the country was back on track. Prudent financial macroeconomic policy is one reason why Indonesia was resilient to the global financial crisis of 2008. Now we will look into the present state and the future projections for Indonesia. Both public and private debt have fallen sharply now, international reserves have grown fast, and inflation has been under control. In combination with relative political stability and certain favorable demographic trends, it provides opportunities for strong economic performance. In the longer term, the Indonesian government aims to be in the top 6 largest global economies by the year 2030. The country has a robust manufacturing and mining sector. The industry now accounts for almost 50% of the GDP, while agriculture stands at merely 15%. The present-day economy is shaped by international trade, domestic consumption, and investments. Let's discuss those fundamentals in detail. In recent years, Indonesia has seen consistently strong domestic demand growth. The resilience of domestic demand to external influences sets Indonesia apart from its ASEAN peers. Over the past 10 years, the correlation between domestic final demand and exports was considerably lower than in Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Domestic demand is likely to continue to expand strongly over the coming years, supported by an expanding middle class. Strong consumption growth also reflects rising incomes, with Indonesians moving out of poverty and into the middle class. Growth in Indonesia's exports to economies within the region and to developing economies outside of the region has outpaced the rise in exports to major advanced economies. Indonesia mostly exports commodities like oil and gas, crude palm oil, electrical appliances, rubber products, and vehicles. Total exports are worth $230 billion, while the imports are $196 billion. I believe that the exports need to increase at this point. The country has stable outlook designated by the credit agencies like Moody's and Fitch. This has led the country to attract crucial foreign investments. It can be seen that Indonesia outperforms other ASEAN nations in this metric. Infrastructure investment is expected to be particularly robust, with government plans for substantially improving the current state of infrastructure through investment by state-owned enterprises and the encouragement of public-private partnerships. The quality of the infrastructure of Indonesia needs improvements, as it is even below India in the global infrastructure ranking, which is one of the big competitors for the nation. However, Indonesia still performs much better when compared to regional rivals like Vietnam and the Philippines. If we discuss the recent global pandemic, we can see the economy of Indonesia was quite resilient, with posting GDP growth of -2.1%, which is not necessarily good, but not bad either when we consider the growth of similar ASEAN nations. Indonesia's growth rate in 2020 was better than most ASEAN nations except for Vietnam, which outperformed. We have made a video on the economy of Vietnam as well. If you haven't seen that video, consider watching it as well. We have added the link in the description. Indonesia's economy is expected to grow by 5% in 2022 and 5.2% in 2023 as domestic demand continues to recover, according to a report by the Asian Development Bank. The COVID-19 vaccination rate for the country is also really good, with more than 70% of the population currently vaccinated. The Indonesian economy has recorded relatively strong average growth over a number of decades. Considerable structural change has taken place over this time, with Indonesia becoming increasingly industrialized and integrated into the global economy. With plans for substantial infrastructure spending over the next several years and favorable demographics, the Indonesian economy is widely expected to continue to grow at a strong pace over the next decade. So, here the video comes to an end. The country started with a very weak financial position and a fragile political system. Over time, the country developed economically under President Suharto's regime. However, the Asian financial crisis disrupted the growth trajectory. Slowly and gradually Indonesia recovered from it, and now it is on the path to take over the world. Although there is a ton of interesting history that we can add to the video, but as a result, it will become too large. Here I have a question for you all viewers. Do you believe that Indonesia will become an economic powerhouse much like China, South Korea, or Japan? I want every viewer to answer this question in the comment section. Do leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Follow us on Twitter to engage with us. Subscribe to stay updated and share our videos. Till then, goodbye.